is Loria Yumedo. I am the Outreach and Community Relations Director for Street Racing Kills. I joined the organization 3 years ago when my niece was killed by a young man that was street racing. I'm really glad that you guys are here under these circumstances today because my story is very personal. On May 11th, 2019, my niece Bethany Holguin and her little brother Emilio were on their way to pick up her daughter. It was the day before Mother's Day, and Bethany wanted to surprise her mom and show up the day before. She was only 3 blocks from picking up her daughter. She was at her father's house, and they told their dad that they were going to surprise their mother and they were going to go meet up with her. As they were driving to pick up Layla, 2 young men decided to race down a residential street. These young men were going about 100 miles per hour when one of them ran the stop sign and hit my niece Bethany. They hit Bethany so hard, every bone in her body was crushed. This is something that's 100% preventable, and I never thought that our family would be going through something so tragic. And Sunday, Mother's Day, as we were looking for Bethany and Emilio, never in a million years did I think that I was going to get the phone call that I did at 5 p.m. that day. It was my sister-in-law, and she told me that Bethany had passed away, and they asked me to identify her body. My sister-in-law lived pretty far from the coroner's office, and I was the closest, so my husband and I drove to the coroner's office. Honestly, the only way I was able to drive myself there was I thought maybe it wasn't her. Why would the authorities call and ask you to identify a body if they knew who it was? Part of me thought hopefully, somebody stole her car, it was somebody else in the vehicle. That was the only way that I could get myself to drive. As we drove down to the coroner's office, we get there, and then I realized it's just a formality. A special agent came to the door. She introduced herself. She told me she was sorry for my loss, and then she asked me if I wanted to know what happened. I said, yes, please. She gave me all the details of the crash, and then she asked me to identify Bethany. At that moment, that was the first time that I really, truly understood what heartbreak was. The same piece of me died with Bethany that day. And the hardest part was leaving that coroner's office, not being able to take her with me. See, our family didn't have time to grieve. Emilio was still in the hospital, and he was holding on for dear life. Straight from the coroner's office, we went to the ICU. We get there, and the doctors are very honest with us. They tell us that Emilio may not survive, and they let us walk in and out of the ICU all night to say our goodbyes just in case he didn't make it. You see, when Emilio was hit, half of his skull was removed because his skull was crushed in the crash. His eye socket was broken. His cheekbone was broken. All the teeth on the left side of his face were broken. His arm was broken and his pelvis was broken. The doctors prepared us for what we were about to see because they don't fix those injuries when they're not sure you're gonna survive. So when we walked into that hospital room, all I saw was someone I didn't recognize. Half of his skull was removed so his brain could swell, and so his head looked deformed. I had no idea it was Emilio. All I only knew was him because they told me it was him. There was blood all over him. He still had broken bones. And I remember just staying there, and I remember praying, and I asked God, please, please, God, don't let Maria have to bury 2 of her children. And I knew Bethany was with them, and she helped him get through it. The doctors told us that if Emilio survived, he would have to learn how to walk again, talk again. He probably wouldn't remember who we were. Till this day, they call him a miracle child because Emilio pulled through. He knew who we were. And after he found out that his sister passed away, he wanted to be at her funeral. 3 weeks after Bethany's passing, we buried her. And Emilio walked out of that hospital, and he was one of the pallbearers at his sister's funeral. So what happened that day? Well, 2 young men decided to race. 30 seconds of adrenaline changed all of our lives forever. When they hit Bethany, the autopsy report said her neck was broken, all of her ribs were broken, her legs were broken, her arms were broken. 3 of her ribs had punctured her lung. All of her injuries would have killed her. It was ultimately considered blunt force trauma that took her life. I know the young man that took Bethany's life didn't know Bethany. They had never met. He had no intentions of killing her. But he made one bad decision. And that one bad decision took her life, changed Emilio's life forever. And the worst part of it is Bethany had a little girl that was 6 years old at the time. Having to tell a 6-year-old that her mother is never coming home is one of the hardest things our family had to do. Layla's 9 now, and Layla still doesn't understand that mommy's never coming home. When you make a decision like this, you can affect many people's lives, including your own. You see, the young man that took Bethany's life left the scene. He was found 3 months later, and he was ultimately convicted of felony hit and run, vehicular manslaughter, and bodily injury to a passenger. He was given a 7-year prison sentence for what happened that day. I sat in the courtroom with him, with his family, with our family. As we cried, his family cried. Cried for different reasons. They were losing their son for 7 years. I lost my niece forever. But I felt their pain. So I share Bethany's story because I want you to give you a different perspective on things. I want you to make better decisions moving forward. I want you to understand that these type of decisions can change your life and an innocent person's life forever. You know, you don't see these things on the news. You hear about people losing their lives to street racing, takeovers, these donuts. But the things that you don't hear on the news is the process of burying a 23-year-old that had her whole life ahead of her still. Bethany wanted to be a model. She was only 23 years old. She was beautiful. We used to share makeup tips. We used to always talk about what we were going to do with our future. She was in school to be a dialysis technician. When her car was finally released, I had got her backpack from the car with her books from school. She wanted to save lives. That's what she was going to school for. She's saving lives now every day in a different way. And I'm very proud to speak on her behalf. But it wasn't her choice. She didn't choose to race. She was just going to pick up her little girl. This is 100% preventable. No family should ever have to go through a tragedy like this. Nobody should have to feel the pain and agony that our family felt. Now, Emilio, it's been 3 years since the crash. Until this day, he still has unexpected seizures. The brain injury, there's no way to really figure out why, but it's something that he'll have to deal with for the rest of his life. And as we raised Layla, we made a promise to Bethany when we buried her that we were gonna make sure that her death wasn't in vain and that we kept her memory alive. And so that's what we do with Layla. We're making sure that she knows who her mother is, and she remembers everything about her mother and how beautiful she was and how beautiful she is, and that she's saving lives every day. When you take somebody's life, a family member like myself is given the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. You don't ever want to be on the other end of that victim impact statement. And the young man that took my niece's life, for my family, I was the one that did our victim impact statement. Put yourself in his shoes, having to sit there and listen to me talk about what you've taken away from our family. And I definitely told this young man everything that he took away from us. Bethany was 23 years old. We called her our unicorn. She dyed her hair every color that you can imagine. I couldn't wait for her to walk in the room because her style sense was just amazing. I couldn't wait to see what she was wearing. I couldn't wait to see what color her hair was gonna be. Couldn't wait to see how her makeup was because she's just had this artistic touch about her. She was a sneaky little thing. She had found out that her boyfriend was gonna propose to her. He had actually asked my husband if he could marry my niece. And she told me she found the ring. And I used to laugh. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, well, I found the ring and it's cute. And I'm so excited. And she's like, so we started planning her wedding. He hadn't even proposed to her yet, but we were already planning her wedding. And we talked about what kind of makeup she wanted for her wedding. And one of the hardest things that I had to deal with was I had to do her makeup for her funeral instead of for her wedding. And I shared these things with this young man, and he sat there and he listened to everything that I loved about Bethany, everything our family loved about Bethany, everything that her daughter loved about her. And he had to sit there and just listen to it. So again, I share my story. I share Bethany's story with you because I want to give you a different perspective on things. And I want you to think about you having to sit in that chair and what it would feel like if you took somebody's life and having to listen to somebody like myself talk about what you're taking away from us. We have a hashtag SRK for all the angels of SRK, and Bethany's one of the angels. So our hashtag is Live for Betty, Forever 23, because Bethany's life was taken when she was only 23 years old, and she'll forever be 23. So today I ask you to live your life for her. Her life was cut short, but you can make better decisions moving forward, and you can live your life for her.